Chapter 18. Every eye swiveled towards the lean Englishman as the import of the sheriff's words sank in. Arrested for murder. Amazed silence held the group spellbound. Plumford stiffened, his jaw slackened, and the stem of the briar pipe slid from beneath his teeth. The pipe dropped into his lap, scattering the glowing dottle down his front, shattering on the floor. In the tense atmosphere, the sound seemed thunderous. As slow-moving and massive as a bull, Town Marshal Moreland rolled to his feet and lifted a ring of keys off a nail beside his desk. Something akin to ironic humor flickered in the sheriff's eyes as they traveled round the circle. Bill Williams' homely features were twisted in perplexity. Mommy Rakestraw's red lips were scornful, horror dilating the eyes of Phyllis Ford. No one spoke as the beefy marshal creaked ponderously across the plank floor, the key ring hooked on the forefinger. Then the Englishman jerked awkwardly to his feet, like a wooden puppet jogged by a string.
"Is this a joke?"
he demanded, voice hoarse, retreating before the marshal's unwieldy advance. "Your luck's frayed out, Plumford," said Pat stonily.
"But you can't charge a fellow with bloody murder upon a mere chain of coincidence. It's dastardly."
"Well, men have been hung for less." The sheriff's voice was an effort. "Take him away, Jim." The marshal's huge paw dropped on Plumford's stiff shoulder. He steered his prisoner across the room towards the door in the rear of the office. Unresisting, the Englishman moved like an Ottoman, lips tight, as though his faculties were numbed by surprise. The door slammed behind the two men. Pat's eyes softened as they dwelt upon Phyllis Ford. The girl's features were drained white. Her tortured eyes were riveted on the closed door as though it shut out all hope of happiness. Then she quietly fainted, slid silently out of her chair, and lay, huddled and still, amid the debris of cigar butts and burnt matches on the unswept floor. In the confusion of scraping chairs, the men sprang towards the pitiful form, but Mommy Rakestraw was already on her knees, loosening the girl's bowance.
"Stand clear, you jugheads, and just give her air," she flung over her shoulder. "Bill, don't stand there a-gawking. Get me some water, pronto. Can't you see the girl's had an awful shock? She fell for that fish like a load of rock, and now he's charged with murdering her uncle. It's enough to make any girl faint."
Bill stumbled in with a slopping bucket of water. Mommy stripped off her bandana and soaked it, gently bathing the white face. Phyllis stirred, her eyes, still tragic with horror, blinked open.
"Everything's all right, dear," crooned Mummy softly. "These lawmen tangle their ropes aplenty. I gamble that stiff-necked dude will be out of the slammer within a week, and worry-sharing won't help."
She slid her strong young arms beneath the girl's body and slid her back upon the chair as easily as if she was handling a doll. Then she turned wrathfully upon the three men, standing awkwardly as men will when confronted by a woman in trouble.
"You Jaspers, get out of here and leave the girl alone. Aren't you made trouble enough already?"
Ezra's one eye sought Pat, and the sheriff jerked his head towards the street. The three filed out upon the plank board, and as they bunched outside, Jim Moreland's form blocked the doorway. "Gosh darn it, Pat," he growled. "Why in the hell don't you call your shots? You might have near started a stampede." "Gee wilkers, I should say so," chimed in Bill. "Yes, sir." "'Pears you gents need a tonic," commented the sheriff, leading the way towards the wagon wheel. The sheriff bought a bottle of bourbon, and the four settled around a liquor-stained table. Jim Moreland dexterously rolled a cigarette with his one good hand. The chair squeaked dismally as he settled his bulk against his back. "Well?" he droned. Now we got Pete's killer and the buzzards are picking the bones of them gun-toting cowboys. I reckon we can slacken the rain. Pat poured 2 fingers. The job ain't even half done, Jim. You forgot the Mirage mine? Till we locate the mine and clean up the wild bunch that's holding the gap, we got trouble setting heavy upon our shoulders. Cheyenne is going to run ore sometime, and he'll have to blast a way out. We gotta go get him. Where? Demanded Ezra. The sheriff smiled wearily. Ain't we been busting our guts to try answering that question? He turned sharply to Bill on his left, the squat rider dolely chewing on an unlit smoke. How much does Ma Meesh's Rakestraw know? Bill shrugged helplessly. So help me, Pat, I couldn't tell you. No, sir. Todd's tied up with the gang, but I'll stake my saddle that Ma Mee's shooting square. Well, how come she rode to the gap? The rider shook his head in gloomy negation. For gosh sake, snap out of it, barked the sheriff. You're acting like a droopy-eyed calf. Well, I kind of took a shining to the dude. Weren't so bad when you got under his skin, he added. He ain't no killer, no sir. Men are like horses, rumbled Ezra. When there's a streak of poison runs through 'em, it's got to come out. The dude was playing for millions of dollars. He done overplayed his hand. Forget the dude. Pat laid a kindly hand on the squat rider's shoulder. You rustle over to the office and tell Ma Mee she can ride back to the Bar W. Guess the girl's in a tied up like a rattlesnake with Todd. Bill slowly scraped back in his chair, leaving his drink untouched. Bill washed some shoulder through the bat wings, and then he turned to the marshal. Pull your deputies out of the Bar W. Have them keep cases on the spread. If Ma Mee's tied up with Cheyenne, she'll head for the gap again, or Cheyenne will send a man to the Bar W. Drop me a word when anything pops. Guess Ezra and I will head over for Dutch Springs. The sheriff rose. And, he added as an afterthought, round up all the ginnies that are loose around these hills. Moreland blinked. His eyes sought Pat's empty glass questioningly. What sense was combing in the hills for a bunch of useless burros when a bandit pack was defying justice out in the barrens? You say round up all the ginnies? He gulped. Pat nodded. Every dang desert canary you can gather in. You corral them at the Bar W. And bring them along a dozen pine knobs soaked in tar. I'll be back with a posse inside a week. He turned to Ezra. Reckon we'll ride up and say howdy to Sam before we pull out. The town marshal numbly downed a drink. He knew better than arguing with Pat Stevens, but ginnies? Ponies would have made sense. A fella could straddle a horse, and pine knobs. He sighed and poured another stiff peg. Well, bandit trouble in the barrens was Pat's headache. His jurisdiction ended at the piles of discarded tin cans at the fringe of town. Ginnies and pine knobs. Good grief, next thing the sheriff would be corralling coyotes. Pat relaxed at ease in the cozy living room of the Lazy Mare. It felt good to be back at the home ranch with Sally, his wife, rattling dishes in the kitchen and saddle horses stamping in the barn across the yard. A hearty meal under his belt, the sheriff slid deeper into his favorite rocker and eyed Doc, his stapling son, frowning over schoolwork at the table. But he could not keep his thoughts away from the elusive Mirage mine and the showdown that was surely that lay ahead. Cheyenne and his bunch of desperados would be a tough nut to crack, he mused, drawing hard on the corncob pipe he reserved for home use. But it had to be cracked. The news that an escaped convict had grabbed the richest mine in the southwest defied the sheriff of Powder Valley and got away with it, would spread across the range from Denver to the Bordo. He'd never live her down. In his mind's eye, he could see fellow lawmen in a score of cow towns shaking their heads scornfully and opinion that Pat Stevens was going soft, that it was time the old horse was put out to pasture. Dang it, if only he could locate that dog-blasted mine. What use forcing the gap if he had to ride blind through the wilderness beyond? If he deputized every Jasper in Dutch Springs and Dansville who could fork a pony, they might hunt for a month among the chaos of canyons and find nothing. For the dozenth time, he pulled a dog-eared piece of Pete Ford's map from his pants pocket and spread it upon his knee. The trail to the mine was plainly marked. He traced it with his forefinger, the blasted pine, blasted juniper, piled rocks, piebald rock. Any jughead could follow it. With Sam and Ezra, he had checked every landmark, and they found an empty canyon. Phyllis Ford placed the mine north. That made the map a fake. His brow ceased. Why in hell would Pete leave a fake map to his relative? Sally came into the room and perched on the arm of her husband's chair. Although well into her 30s, she was still, as Billy Williams would have phrased it, pretty as a painted wagon. Why the frown? She inquired, ruffling his hair. Is that funny map so terribly hard to understand? Pat smiled ruefully. That map, old lady, is the most doggone it exasperating document that I've ever handled, and I've handled quite a few. She gazed at the sheet, soiled with sweat, curiously. It does seem quite plain. Plain as the horn on a saddle, grunted the sheriff, but it don't mean nothing. He stuffed his pipe, and Sally held a match to the bowl. Leaning back, he unburdened his mind of the story of Pete's murder and the lost mirage. Sally listened quietly, picked up the map, and studied it closely. You said it was sewn behind his hatband? She asked. Yeah. Then if he lost his hat, he would lose the map, and any person finding it would discover the secret of his treasured mine? I guess so. Then mightn't he disguise the location so that he could always find the mine himself by glancing at the map and no one else could read it? Maybe, drawled Pat. He knew Sally's analytical mind. Probably he figured that was what had once made her a dang good schoolmarm. His wife pursed her lips as she continued to scan the much-fingered map. Why did he make those two dotted lines, one from Needle Rock to Old Smoky, and the other from Needle Rock to Black Butte? Well, according to the map, explained her husband patiently, the mine lays in a straight line from the Needle to Old Smoky, but the map's haywire. Then why did he draw the other line up to Black Butte? Persisted Sally. Well, Pete's not around to ask, returned the sheriff drolly. He's strumming a harp. And in his dying moments, murmured Sally, he wrote in the dust, right is... What was the first letter of the incomplete word? W. Right is wrong, she announced triumphantly. Are you crazy? Why, it's as plain as that sarcastic look on your face, cried his wife, her voice raising with excitement. The trail runs through the gap, look. She spread the map on his knee and traced the trail with a slim finger. And then it turns right at a sharp angle. You followed the obvious course, which he was so carefully to indicate, and found nothing. That was just what Pete Ford intended. He was a shrewd man. If he lost the map, the finder would never locate his mine, but he could. Why? Because it was plainly indicated to Pete Ford's eyes. When he was dying, he tried hard to leave a clue. He tried to scratch right as wrong in the dust. Pat was listening attentively now. Maybe Sally, with her agile brain, had hit upon something worthwhile. "Well?" he demanded.
"Well," she mimicked, "Phyllis Ford says the mine lies north, not south. If right is wrong, then left is right. You should have turned left instead of right and headed north. That's why he drew the other dotted line. And I bet you a new dress, Pat Stevens, that your old mine lies on the line between Needle Rock and Black Butte, right there. Give me your pencil, Doc."
She made a cross on the dotted line that slanted up to Black Butte, equidistant from Needle Rock, with the location of the mine as indicated on the lower line. Pat sucked vigorously on his pipe stem, dawning triumphant in his eyes. Sally's excitement was contagious. "Say, maybe you got something there, old lady," he chuckled. "They should have made you sheriff. If you hit the bullseye, I'll buy that new dress and throw in a bonnet to boot." Pencil gone, Doc seized what he considered a legitimate opportunity to abandon his hated home lessons. He slid quietly off his chair and slipped out of the room, headed for the horse barn. His parents were too engrossed in the problem of the Mirage mine to observe his silent withdrawal. 2 minutes later, the boy's head thrust through the door.
"Say, they's a Jasper riding hell for leather across the pasture." "There's a rider, not they's a Jasper," corrected his mother. "When will you ever learn to stop murdering the English language?" "Well, he's sure cutting the breeze," maintained Doc stoutly.
His mother sighed. Pat roared and rose reluctantly. Not much rest for a lawman. The newcomer peeled off a blowing pony in the yard and jingled towards the house. In the light that flooded through the open doorway, Pat recognized Bill Pratt, one of Jim Moreland's deputies. "Trouble, Bill?" he hailed, stepping outside.
"Plenty."
The deputy swept the dust off his Stetson. "There's a mob running hell bent on hanging the dude up to dry. Jim says come a-running with every gun you can gather, or the limey's cold meat. Not that it matters a damn sight. I reckon the buzzard's swinging in a tree right about now." End of chapter 18.